Good morning. My name is Rita Jo Lewis. I am the Senior Fellow and Director of Congressional Affairs at the German Marshall Fund, and I've been leading this great GMF side conversation around stakeholders' influence on inclusion, diversity, and equity. And it is just great to be able to be here in the second iteration of our conversation that we launched in May. You know, we have everyone on this call. We just want to thank you for joining in with us today. We have our participants from the private sector, the public sector, and the non-governmental organization community, having the ability to put together senior executives who are D&I experts, who are philanthropic experts, who are senior leaders in senior economic development and small business from the United States, all the way from our American cities of Houston and Atlanta, and also in Europe from Amsterdam and Stuttgart. And so these are some of our largest cities that are going to be represented on this call today. You know, as we come out of this post-COVID period, on both sides of the Atlantic, the conversation is always leading to what? Jobs. It starts with jobs. And so about how are we going to create economic opportunities for all of our citizens in these communities. And so it gives me a great pleasure to be able to talk about, to introduce Todd Corley, who's a senior fellow at GMF and a new senior vice president at Carhartt, a leading Dearborn, Michigan global company and expert on DE&I to start us off this morning. Todd, I'll turn it over to you.
Rita, thank you very much. Good morning to everybody who has joined us today. It is my pleasure to be back with you for the second installment of our session. We had a great time our first round, and I suspect we'll have a great time this time as well. I'll be very brief with my introductions. Rita has given me a generous one by just saying that we're in for a treat today. I'm joined today with Wendy Lewis-Jackson from the Kresge Foundation. Wendy is a super and superb executive along foundations and philanthropic efforts. She leads the Kresge work to work on efforts to revitalize Detroit, empower economic development, workforce development, and by her peers, even them, they have shown their support and their love by bestowing with her awards for years. One in particular, the Dr. Gerald K. Smith Award for philanthropy by the Michigan Forum for African Americans in Philanthropy, which is an affinity group of the Council of Michigan Foundations. So Wendy will join me soon, and I think there she is. Wendy, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to turn it over to her for remarks. I will join her at the end of her conversation with you, just to talk about what it means for economic development and empowerment for all people. Wendy, thank you for joining us today.
Well, greetings, and thank you, Todd, for that very kind introduction. I've been tremendously fortunate to be a part of the German Marshall Fund community for many years as both a fellow and supporter. So I'm tremendously grateful to be with you today. And I'm grateful for the fund's steadfast leadership in convening this timely and important conversation about authentic strategies for building inclusive societies and communities. So as I thought about this session and the amazing group of panelists that GMF has assembled to have this conversation, I found myself thinking a lot about the fact that we are really in a seismic moment for change in both the United States and within our transatlantic relationships. After a pandemic that has left, more than 600,000 Americans dead and peeled back the curtain on inequities that have been deeply embedded in the design of our institutions, our laws, and our systems, we cannot move on or go back to business as usual. And last year, the tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others before them required that we begin to remove our collective blindfold. We began to see with our own eyes, not only the horrors of issues like police brutality, but also the threat that racialized hate has on our continued ability to realize a better future for our communities. So domestic policy on both sides of the Atlantic has been upended by the pandemic. And the toll of the past 15 months really requires all of us to engage in both individual and a little bit of collective soul searching that centers race, equality, and trust. So this is an important inflection point that we cannot afford to get wrong. For as we've seen in this country, in the US, the existential threat is to the heart of Western democracy itself. So as we begin to reemerge into civic life and restart our economies, we have this opportunity, and I believe a moral imperative, to reimagine. And that's what today's conversation really is going to be about. It's about the fact that we can no longer afford to tinker with incremental thinking or solutions when it comes to economic equity and providing good jobs, middle class, and good wage jobs in our communities. So in our session today, we are going to talk about jobs. But we all know it's more than that. It's much bigger than that. This is really about how do we reset and build an economy for all citizens? How do we authentically innovate in ways that dismantle the structural inequality and economic security that's built into workforce and educational systems? In the wake of COVID-19, massive job losses, rapidly evolving business models, and accelerating technology and automation, it's dramatically reshaping our economies, both in the US and across the Atlantic. In many ways, the future of work is already here, but not for everyone. 1 in 3 people in the United States are considered already economically insecure. They were considered economically insecure prior to the pandemic. And half of all Black and Latinx residents in this country, and that includes half of all Black and Latinx residents in this country. So with an uncertain road to recovery ahead, dismantling structural barriers to racial equity and economic and workforce development will be crucial to building a reimagined, resilient, and inclusive economy. You know, last summer, millions took to the streets on both sides of the Atlantic so that we can begin to dream again, so we can begin to breathe again. Now we have a mandate and a responsibility to build back and build back better with broad and transformative coalitions that are ready to bring their power, their influence, and their knowledge to bear. What are the leading 21st century workforce and education policy efforts that are going to prepare diverse communities for the jobs of the future, and jobs that will help families and communities build wealth, generational wealth? In workforce development, traditionally, we have been working primarily with the same model. That model has focused on retraining workers who lack skills, getting them in a new job, and returning them to the labor market. In many ways, it has tended to be a one and done approach. However, we now know that thanks to data that has been disaggregated with a racial equity lens, that there are complex structural changes in labor markets that make this model outdated. It's not just being skilled up for one job for one time. This is a system that fundamentally needs to look at how do we continuously improve and invest in workers and their skills for multiple years as structural changes in our economy continue to unfold. So during the last 15 months, there has been an acknowledgement and call for action among employers, community organizations, civic leaders, workers, and policymakers to talk about how we begin to create a new frame. What is clear to me is that on both sides of the Atlantic, we're better together, and we can reimagine economic opportunity with strategies and solutions to advance economic equity, where racial income gaps have been eliminated. All jobs are good jobs, and everyone that wants work and wants to work has access to employment that supports their families. Again, a bold vision of economic equity and workforce strategies that we're eliminating racial income gaps, we're focusing on high road, high quality jobs that pay a living wage, and that we are providing the kinds of supports that are necessary to help families thrive for those that are trying to access the workforce. So this is a bold vision, and it does require a new framework for workforce strategies grounded in disaggregated data and deep investment in local change makers. In many ways, we're talking about a new civic architecture where race and economic equity becomes the agent of change, and distributed leadership is the operating system for community problem solving. Let me put it this way. What this essentially means is that communities must employ cross-sectoral collaboration to tackling ways to open new opportunities for all of its citizens. The solutions can't just reside in the public sector or the private sector alone. Both must now come together with the nonprofit sector, educational systems, faith-based leadership. Together, they must redesign more equitable systems that connect people to jobs. This framework also requires us to be much more data-driven. Because of the complexity and the fast-moving changes that are happening in our labor markets, data is a way to provide, it becomes a little bit more of an equalizer. And data matters for building equity, because what you care enough to measure, you actually change. It's a tool for identifying priorities and tracking progress toward our goals. Data also equips community leaders with the information they're going to need in more real time to inform solutions for inclusive growth and prosperity. So in this conversation today, you're going to see why the cause of economic equity and justice and the connections to workforce development must be elevated to an immediate imperative. Also today, we're going to focus on the urgency of now. The fact that now is our time to redouble our efforts to build an economy that works for all, an economy in which everyone can benefit and fully participate, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, or geography. That now is our time to tap into the potential of workers and communities that have been in the past locked out of prosperity, so we can all share the benefits of a more equitable and inclusive community or region. And now is our time to join the German Marshall Fund in embracing the bold, launching innovative policy ideas that can transform systems and institutions, both in the US and across the Atlantic. So thank you, and I look forward to this conversation today.
Wendy, thank you so much. Your words were remarkable. I think that they have landed well for many on both sides of the Atlantic. I have two questions, if I can ask, before we turn it over to the panel. I am still stuck on the word in their first sentence around trust. How do you think we can build trust so that stakeholders who might have competing visions about what would work and what doesn't work, that they trust that the other person has their best interests in mind also to get to the same outcome? I think that's something I would love for you to share a little bit about, if you could.
Yeah, change comes at the speed of trust, and but it is an important ingredient, and why I felt it was important to lift up in my remarks. And I think I like to say we start with the fact that we, in many ways, have common ground in our communities. And you build trustful relationships based on that commonality of the kind of change that folks want to see in terms of good jobs, jobs that pay good wages, jobs that give people the ability to support their family. And so in many ways, if you're able to start there, and that is why the power of collaboration is got to be the new operating code in communities for doing this work. It can, as I said, not just reside in one sector. You've got to be able to come together and again, on that common platform of we all want to do better. We all want to see better.
Right. We all want to be better. Great. My last one, and after that, I'll turn it over to Rita to introduce the panel. When you think about the heart of Detroit and its DNA and who Detroit is in this space of, workers working hard, wanting good wages, good opportunities, what would you say for those who could learn a little bit about, the city that we call, the Motor City?
Yeah, I was trying to thank you for that question, because I do believe Detroit is a model for the kind of framework that I lifted up in my remarks. Part of it comes from what we've been through as a community, but I'll even go back further. We are the city that built the middle class in this country, and built a whole era of prosperity around work and the kind of quality jobs that are required in a community to support families. I wholeheartedly believe that this city has the ability to do that again and be a model for the rest of the country in how we do it. And we're starting to see a lot of the framework that I lifted up being modeled right now in the city, whether it's through the kinds of collaborations that have come together, the trust building collaborations that have come together to look at, how we can expand our economy in ways that, benefit all Detroiters, the kind of disaggregation of data that we now are using to inform our strategies, the role of the private sector in moving, I think, a lot of the policy change in collaboration with others, but the fact that they're at the table now talking about these policies in Detroit is huge. And so there are things and lessons that we've learned in trying to reshape an economy and do that in a way that connects deeply with workforce that is instructive, not only in the US, but abroad.
Wendy, thank you so much. Rita, I'll turn it over to you.
No, first of all, that was just a fascinating conversation. And Wendy, we want to thank you as one of our Marshall Memorial Fellows. It always does us proud to see the work that you're doing out in Detroit. And Todd, we thank you for leading that conversation. We're going to turn very quickly over to our panel. We have a great panel of practitioners and experts from our leading cities in the United States and in Europe. And it's going to be moderated by our own GMF fellow, cities fellows, actually, Dr. Anne Marie Brady. Anne Marie, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rita Jo. And thank you so much, Todd and Wendy. That was a really fantastic comments and thoughts and reflections, and sets the scene nicely for our next portion of our program. So I'd like to take a moment and introduce our panelists. We have four wonderful people, starting with Nancy Flake Johnson, who is the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Atlanta. We have Viktor Boss, who is the founder and program director of TechConnect at the Amsterdam Economic Board. We have Christopher Olson, who is the director of the Houston Mayor's Office of Trade and International Affairs. And we have Nicola Schelling, who is the regional director of the Verband region of Stuttgart. The point of bringing our panelists together today is that we want to hear from 4 unique individuals from different regions and different countries, actually, about what's happening on the ground. So when we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, what does that actually look like when we're trying to advance economic development in our cities and regions? So I thought I'd start with a question for our panelists. Given the different national and regional context of our 4 participants, let's start by having each of you provide our listeners with a sense of how diversity, equity, and inclusion in economic development is defined in your work. And indeed, has equity, diversity and inclusion in economic development taken on a greater sense of urgency in light of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement? How about we start with Nancy? Let's hear from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you and the Marshall Fund for this opportunity. So here in Atlanta, in the state of Georgia in the United States, the Urban League of Greater Atlanta's work is focused on closing the racial wealth gap. Here in Georgia, we rank #1 for business out of all the 50 states in the United States. Yet, we're practically #1 for poverty. We rank among the poorest among the states in education, and certainly economic mobility and mass incarceration. So clearly, there is a disconnect between the economic opportunity that being #1 for business is creating for our state and the citizens of our state. So companies that come here who choose the great state of Georgia oftentimes have to import the talent. And so the people who are here, who really the tax benefits that are attracting these companies to the state, we're making investments off the backs of the working people, aren't benefiting from the jobs and the economic activity that's here. So this is where Urban League steps in. We see ourselves as a bridge between the economic opportunity that is created and the people of our state. And we do that through an economic mobility model that we've adopted and our 6 core pillars, workforce development being #1, entrepreneurship, small business development, to youth and young adult development, housing and wealth building, and then social justice, and of course, civic engagement. And so I'll talk a little bit more later about how our economic mobility model works, but it focuses on the high demand, high paying sectors of our state. Oh, and I'd like to mention Urban League is part of a national network of Urban League affiliates across the country. We're one of 90 affiliates and we're headquartered in New York City.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you.
Victor, let's turn to you. What's happening on the ground in Amsterdam?
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie, and good afternoon from Amsterdam to all. So let me first explain what the Amsterdam Economic Board is and does. It is a public-private organization here in the region, and TechConnect is a program that we started about 3 years ago. What we saw is that the IT and the IT teams and ecosystem is not diverse at all, and that there are many jobs and that there are many talents that we don't find, and that also don't find the jobs. That we really thought this we should make a program of this to activate more than 50,000 people in 4 years from the underrepresented groups in IT, to bring them to IT studies and IT jobs. And the way we did it is that we actually removed the obstacles that are in the way for people to find an IT study or an IT job. And the perspective we took was an economic one. So when you find the talent and when you educate them and you match them with an IT job, then you create value, and at the same time you create diversity. So that is the way we think, and then by definition it's sustainable, and you actually do two things at the same time. So I mean, everything we do, and it's on the ground, building the initiatives to remove the obstacles for the underrepresented groups, diversity, inclusion, and equity is been everything we do. And I know that when I talk about diversity, the groups that we want to reach don't necessarily always feel the message that I send. So the cooperation with the networks in the different areas, that is where we started, because that is the main thing. When you talk about trust, what Wendy did before, you have to build the trust, and then the networks in the area, I think, is the go-to community.
Great. Thank you so much, Viktor. Christopher, how about what's happening in Houston?
Well, thank you very much, and Emery, thank you for both the introduction and for moderating this panel today. It's an absolute pleasure to see you all, and I first really just want to thank the German Marshall Fund again for hosting yet another wonderful event, and for Rita Jo for all the work she has done and continues to do to bring cities into this global discussion. As was kind of talked about in the introduction, well, I'd love to say that the pandemic changed everything. I really don't think it did. What it did do, however, was to bring into sharper focus the already existing structural inequalities that existed within our cities and within the broader society. Cities were both the epicenter of the pandemic and the inequality that was brought into the glaring spotlight, because cities are where the people are. Cities are where the jobs are. And in the end, it's going to be cities where the solutions to these challenges are going to be found. So while COVID certainly impacted everybody, it highlighted the urgent need to accelerate many of the initiatives that were already underway. Within the city of Houston, at least, we had launched a number of initiatives pre-COVID that were all on a global economic and trade focus, but also included the full range of social and the first one was really years known as the energy capital world. In the 1980s, more than 70% of our GDP was based on oil and gas. Today, that is high-tech, advanced manufacturing, logistics, but this was all part of a very conscious decision by the city to diversify and to increase economic opportunity. Second was Mayor Turner's signature initiative, which he called Complete Communities, where he took 5 and now 10 areas of Houston that had been traditionally underserved and focused a holistic, all of government attention and resources into these areas. Complete Communities is really focused on skills development and placement programs that are within these complete community zones. And really, as Wendy highlighted in her opening keynote, this is not only a whole of government approach, but it's also bringing together the private sector, nonprofits, neighborhood groups, and other stakeholders to address these challenges. And I'll be happy to go into that a little bit later. Third was in a broad effort on workforce development, with specific attention put towards youth and those on the margins. Houston launched programs like Hire Houston Youth, which was geared toward individuals aged 16 to 24, which provided paid summer internships at the city of Houston, private and public sector, and philanthropic organizations. We also launched a program called Turnaround Houston, which was an initiative, again, launched by Mayor Turner and led by our Office of Business Opportunity to provide job training, resume writing, social service support, educational opportunities, and counseling to help hard-to-employ Houstonians turn their lives around and find economic opportunity. And finally, the challenge was how to do all this in a sustainable manner, and one that builds resiliency within our entire city's social and economic structure. And as we emerge from the pandemic, on a green and just economic recovery. Again, excited to join you all, excited to keep learning more from my fellow panelists. And
Thank you so much, Christopher. Let's turn to Stuttgart. Nicola, what is happening in Germany's motor city / region?
Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to contribute today to this pressing topic and interesting panel. Yes, you might all know Stuttgart region is characterized by a thriving economy with headquarters of international companies like Daimler, Porsche, Bosch, Stihl, etc. And we are one of the world's leading centers of the automotive industry, which is, of course, under transformation. And we have a very comfortable situation due to our idea of equity, which means everyone is having equal access to economic opportunities. We have a very low rate of unemployment, which has been 3.5% before COVID, and which has now grown up to 4.6% after COVID, which is still less than in all Germany. But of course, and that's why I was referring to transformation. For us, it's not obvious. Are these figures of growing unemployment linked with COVID only, or is it just one of the first visible effects of the transformation in the automotive cluster, which of course is all in all a challenge for us. As an export-oriented booming economy, we depend very much on workforce coming into the region. So if we are talking about equity today, for me, that's also equity on the access to workforce. And if we talk about the tasks of a region which needs people coming in, this is of course taking care of the attractiveness of the region itself. It is helping to have a visible, feelable, welcome culture, and being a good partner concerning integration of those people coming in. I would like to give you a figure which is really interesting. In the last 20 years, we had 1.9 million coming in from outside the region for work in the region. Of course, they are not all staying and others are leaving. So we did not grow 1.9 million inhabitants. But there is a huge integration effort in Stuttgart region every day, and it's really well working. Equity for us also means to have access to life quality, to our landscape, and to develop a landscape in order to have a good accessibility to everybody, and to inform about it. That's also part of my task, of our task in Stuttgart region. Equity, of course, means access to mobility, and this means, especially for Stuttgart region, not only to promote individual mobility, but also public transport. We are responsible for the metro system, etc. And of course, we are promoting also the development of autonomous driving, because for me, this is an aspect of equity in mobility that will help us in a couple of years a lot. Since we cannot always and everywhere build a metro station. Access to infrastructure, not only in mobility aspects, but in a huge number of other aspects, is core of equity. And now COVID has shown us how important glass fiber access is, not only for the industrial sector, but for administration, for education, schools, and of course, for home office, we all spend our time in. And glass fiber accessibility is a huge project in Stuttgart region, which is a PPP running since 4 years. And if we hadn't started with that already, that would be an enormous task now. And Wendy has talked about it, education, advanced training. This is a core element in this time of transformation, digitalization, automatization. Equity means that people that are now on the work, they get the opportunity to change their knowledge, to be part of the future, to learn on how to cover new challenges. And so one core aspect of our economic work is to bring together education service and industry in order to find out what is needed, what do people need in the upcoming years to be part of a workforce that is needed in Stuttgart region. So that's for the start. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicola. That's wonderful. Great. Well, I wonder if we can shift the question now to more of the details. You know, Wendy talked about a framework, and in the United States, we're thinking of new frameworks. And this may not be the case necessarily in Amsterdam or Stuttgart, but perhaps we can have a moment, we can hear from our participants about some of the policy or the programmatic or the methods or approaches that are being used to either create new frameworks, leverage some of the recovery money that may have been coming in from national packages, or drawing on longstanding processes that have already been in place. Either way, how are you using these approaches, methods, policies, or programs to build diversity, equity, and inclusion into economic development initiatives? Let's start with Nancy. We'll start with from the top, so to speak.
Okay. Thank you so much. So at the Urban League of Greater Atlanta, we have adopted an economic mobility model that was developed by the Local Initiative Support Corporation. You know, Metro Atlanta has been recognized as the worst place in our nation for income inequality and economic mobility. In Georgia, in the city of Atlanta, a child born into poverty has less than a 4% chance of moving out of poverty into the middle class in their lifetime, yet we're #1 for business. And so this economic mobility model focuses on being the bridge. It's evidence-based. It's almost 20 years in the making. And what we do, it's very simple. There's really two major prongs. The first is we work with the public and private sector to ensure the opportunities are there for people who need access. And that's done through, you know, collaborative consultations, helping private sector and public sector understand new ways to leverage their economic power in a more strategic way to better lift the people in Metro Atlanta and Georgia. But the second piece is people-to-people driven. And that's really the core of the work of the Urban League. And what we do, we're a civil rights organization at our core, but it's three simple things. The first thing is we have to meet people where they are. And in meeting them where they are, we make sure their basic needs are met. We do this part of our work with social workers that we call empowerment advocates. They gain the trust of our citizens in understanding their particular circumstances. To move forward, you can't be worried about the roof over your head and where the next meal is coming from to advance. And so we have leveraged many of the CARES Act dollars, the federal funds that have come out of the COVID. And so in addition to becoming this financial empowerment center, that's the model of LISC, we expanded and created a community emergency relief fund. And we raised $1.7 million over the last 12 months to make sure that we could, when we meet people, first and foremost, we got to keep the roof over their heads. We've got to make sure their basic needs are met. So in doing that, we can pay back rent, we can catch up mortgage payments, we can keep people's cars from being repossessed, we can help with food, connect them with our partners for the healthcare, make sure they're stable, and we assess what are the potential barriers that could inhibit their success. We address those up front, childcare, transportation, et cetera. After they're stable, then the fun begins. This is where we really support people to explore where are the economic opportunities, what occupations will take them to that livable wage and beyond. In our region, it's $28 an hour. That's what it takes with the high cost of housing and all the other costs to live for a single parent and 2 children. And so the high demand sectors here are IT, they're for transportation logistics, the building trades, hospitality, film and television. We've got a $9 billion industry, but it's very limited for Blacks and other minorities to access. So we're that bridge to help get people the training they need. Here's the good news. Many of these sectors offer livable wage laddered career paths that don't require a 4-year degree. So we're very closely aligned and connected and partnered with our technical college system of Georgia. People don't know they can get these credentials and education for free. It's free. I mean, it costs, but we can find ways for them to cover their costs. We help people tap into their talents and their passions and their purpose and align that up with these 7 high demand sectors or other areas where we know they can make that move. And then we also work with small businesses. Some of our clients earn by operating small businesses. So we have an entrepreneurship center in addition to our career center. And we do the same things, coaching, training, help them plan, provide access to capital, to capacity and contracting opportunities. And then the third piece of this model, which I love, is where we teach people how to manage their money and to acquire assets and build wealth. And so we do that work through certified financial coaches. We have certified career coaches and small business coaches. So we have experts who work with families. So this team wraps their arms around each family and each household. And there's no time limit. I mean, we're here. We've been around 100 years. We're not going anywhere. Every family moves at their own pace. That's meeting them where they are is so critical. And we collaborate along the way with certified training providers and the employers. That's critical, right? Because after we get people trained, they've got to have places to go. And all of our employers are experiencing a skills gap. That means they have open, livable wage track positions and not enough people trained. So it's a window of opportunity for equity to really blossom right now. So will it be sustainable? Let's just keep our pedal to the metal. The other thing we do, and I'll close on this, is we empower our folks with civic engagement education. We have to here in Georgia. As many of you know, our state is under siege with voter suppression legislation that has recently been passed, all kinds of tactics that could overturn elections and literally puts our democracy at risk with a target on the backs of African Americans and other people of color. So it is a time to galvanize and to move forward. The beautiful thing is there is a surge of interest. Our goal is to keep the pedal to the metal and that there won't be a waning of this support and interest in collaborating to move the needle in an equitable way.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Viktor, what's happening in Amsterdam?
Yeah, thanks. Well, really interesting what you were talking about, Nancy. And I think it's a bit comparable what we do in Amsterdam with TechConnect. The only thing is that we really focus on IT, which is one of the working areas, the sectors where there's heaps of work. But we started, and I think, to change the way of thinking about bringing a more diverse group to IT in this case. The approach we took was a really holistic approach. When I talked before about the 4 obstacles that we found why the diverse group don't find the jobs in IT, and we set up initiatives to remove the obstacles. We brought initiatives that were already here. We brought them together and in that way, we build the model that financial obstacles, communications obstacles has been removed. And so, for instance, communication distribution, the way that IT jobs are communicated, they don't reach the target groups that we are aiming for. So the message is not right. The channels they use is not right. So they don't really, they don't even know that IT is an option. So that is one example that of the obstacles that we removed. That we did by building a platform, really a guide to guide people from having no idea about what IT has to offer, to really bring them to an IT study and an IT job. The second thing is that we built something different about reskilling. That was, Wendy talked about it as well. Reskilling in this time is more actual, more important than ever, I think. But what traditional way in looking at reskilling is only about reskilling. But I think to have people really reskilled really good, you have to start with the first phase, with getting to know, people getting to know what, in this case, IT is, what it has to offer. Then the next phase is to orientate in what is available, what suits me in skills I have, in the character I have. IT is a really complex domain. Many people don't know what they don't know. So then you have to really guide them through the different phases. And then in the third phase is schooling, reskilling. And then the fourth phase is really matching the reskiller to an IT job. So to have the whole route in hands and see how follow the people who are on the route. I think that is how we have to look at reskilling, because otherwise they will fall out and the investment is not worth it. And we use the reskilling packages that has been available for the recovery packages to make it free and therefore accessible for everyone. So that the packages really help.
Great. Thank you so much, Viktor.
Thanks.
Christopher.
It's an interesting challenge, and I think a lot of us face the same things, and many of us are trying the same solutions. And what happens in one urban environment is, in many respects, is the same in urban environments all over the world. To start with a point that Dr. Nicola brought up with Stuttgart, is Houston has an interesting challenge, is that we are a rapidly growing city. So we're adding about 100,000 people every year, and people aren't leaving, they're coming. And of those, we have one of the most diverse citizenry of any city in the United States. We have 1 in 4 that are foreign born. And as I said, with a growing population, that creates a constantly changing economic environment and a constantly changing workforce that's both trying to meet a traditional demand, but also meet a new demand. As I noted, we're taking a lot of the same approaches that Nancy had noted. The challenges that are in Atlanta are the same that we're facing in Amsterdam and Houston. At the core, from our city policy perspective, we're looking at building an equitable workforce development strategy that both increases wages and decreases the barriers to employment. And as was started in the keynote, is that data is a key part to that. So going through the data and looking at a number of the different studies that were done, we identified a number of necessities for working people, which included food, housing, transportation, child. And our approach for the last years has been to try to use a cross-sector approach, one that leverages not only the private public partnerships, but also an entire all Houston government approach, as well as the we can get from the federal government to try to energize the equitable workforce development efforts, because we're just not going to solve this from one organization on its own. The key to that, of course, is workforce development, education, and training. We have a strong program within our Office of Business Opportunity and my Office of Trade and International Affairs that provides resources of all kinds, from advisors on how to start your
I'm afraid we lost Christopher. Nicola, do you want to close out the question, bring the question full circle?
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to quickly mention that, of course, we benefited quite a lot on the financial support we received during COVID, which was one thing was the subsidies for short-time workers, because short-time work has been essential in Stuttgart region. And we received a huge amount of money from the Land Baden-Württemberg for our metro system, which of course, when the usage went down to less than 50%. And of course, this also means losing a lot of money. And to have a look at the future, I think that bundling forces is so important now, because we have a very, very fast transformation. Transformation has happened quite often in this world, but now it's very fast, because it's a technical transformation, and it is supported by the COVID situation, which makes things transform even faster. And bundling means, for me, for example, our project of private partnership with the telecom we work with to get the glass fiber everywhere in the region. Or I would like to come back to the metro system. It is also bundling forces that all partners of mobility in our region decided not to lower the system's efforts because there are less people using it, but to strengthen the efforts, to put even more money in, as much as we can afford, to make it better, to give an opportunity for the future. And I think that it's one of the big challenges currently, that really to invest in the future, even though we have challenges, also financial challenges now. But and this can only be done by partnerships with different public partners, but also in very close cooperation with the private sector. And I don't talk about education now, you already said so much, which is important, which also shows up that it needs to bundle ideas and needs in order to invest in a good future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Well, we could obviously talk so much longer on these very important issues, but I appreciate that the four of you took the time to provide four different perspectives, but we also see continuity between the four cities and the challenges that they face and the approaches that they're taking to address them. So Nancy, Viktor, Christopher, and Nicola, thank you so much for your thoughts and comments. I'd like to now turn it over or turn it back to Wendy to close out our session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The panel was just outstanding, so my gratitude. You know, in my opening remarks, I said that this session would embrace the bold policy and practice ideas needed to center diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this panel, our panelists did not disappoint. You know, they eloquently expanded our thinking about equity in terms of access to infrastructure, sustainability, closing racial wealth gaps, civic engagement, and advanced training. All of it focused on social and economic mobility, with some key principles in place around improving educational outcomes and increasing the number and share of middle wage jobs, increasing access and capital access in specifically and supports for entrepreneurs and especially minority-owned businesses. But I think, most importantly, meeting families where they are and taking a whole family and child approach to better supporting the workforce and educational needs of their particular cities and communities. So I close today with one of my favorite quotes, which is from James Baldwin, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I really appreciate, and again, express my gratitude to this panel for facing the change and doing so with a future orientation, and doing so with the fact that cities, Christopher is right, will lead the way and already has many of the solutions in place that will be required to do it. So thank you very much. And I look forward to watching and seeing how your work progresses to ensure that, it's not just about growth for growth's sake, but it's growth that is equitable, just, and reparative.
Wendy, we just want to just thank you so much. You have traveled many miles with the German Marshall Fund, and it's just always an honor to work with Kresge Foundation. You've been a big partner for the German Marshall Fund. When I sit and I listen to Todd and Anne-Marie moderate conversations that are, as Todd always tells me, purpose-driven. And I think this was a definite purpose-driven conversation that we had today around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it was also very purposeful because at German Marshall Fund around stakeholder influence, around inclusion, diversity, and equity, it just tells me that everyone on this call is a stakeholder. Everyone on this panel is a stakeholder. But the most important thing that was so interesting was how you talked about the stakeholders in your communities, not just as elected leaders, but the citizens themselves. And to talk about and to hear all of you from in the United States and in Europe talk about similar challenges, but also talk about the opportunities that to be building inclusive societies, I think is so important for this panel. And then finally, as we go to our close, to hear all of you talk about not just a whole approach.
We may have lost Rita there on as she closed. So if that's the case, I just want to say on behalf of the panelists today, thank you so much for joining the conversation.